internet governance and how to address the challenges that we are facing. So first of all, I would like to highlight a bit what is internet society. I'm not going to do much more in depth with regard to this because we have a chapter in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and basically they should be promoting this a bit more. I'll be talking on the definition of internet governance. When we talk about internet governance, what does this mean? Internet governance themes, current internet challenges, assessing the challenges that we are facing, and there will be opportunity for you to ask questions as well. So, internet society, as you may know, was founded in 1992 by these two gentlemen. We have, let's say, Dr. Vin Cerf at your left and also Bob Can at your right. Back then, they were discussing how can we continue to promote the internet that we are discussing right now. And they came up with internet society. Internet society, it has what we call, it focuses on three main areas. The first one is what we call standard development, so internet-related standard development. You have a lot of organizations out there that are focusing on all kinds of standards, but Internet Society, through what we call the Internet Engineering Task Force, is focusing only on internet-related standards. And we do this through what we call the Internet Engineering Task Force. The second area where Internet Society focuses is what we call policy development. And in this regard, you may hear our voice on all kinds of internet-related issues and challenges. And the third area where we are quite active is what we call education and capacity building. With capacity building, we would like to see our own people in the region, in this case in the Caribbean, taking the lead and not always looking at Europe and the US for assistance. So as an introduction, I think it's I did mention this previously, but I think it's very important when we talk about internet and internet governance that we know what we're talking about. And that is why what we call the internet free operational layers is very, very important. First of all, we need to have what we call a telecommunication infrastructure, be it wired, wireless, satellite communication. That's not important. You need to have a telecommunication infrastructure in place. And once we have this telecommunication infrastructure up and running, and then we go to the next level, to what we call the domain name system level, at which Albert was explaining a while ago, which is based on all these internet protocols, TCP, etc., etc. And once you have, let's say, the technical infrastructure of the internet up and running, and then we as human beings, we are going to the highest level where we interact with, let's say, with the applications, the Facebook, Google, Twitter, and so on and so on. So this is very important because nowadays, if you ask someone what is the internet, most people would answer things such as Facebook or maybe Google, Twitter. But we need to make this distinction. What is the internet? And that is why it's very important to break it down in these three operational layers. So let's focus now a bit on what we call the internet governance. So what is internet governance? We are having now a national internet governance forum in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. But what is internet governance? And this is exactly what we're going to focus a bit on. When you look at the word or the concept, let's say internet governance, we see two key words. We see internet and we see governance. Internet, I think it's quite straightforward given that Albert already did explain it. But if you look at the internet itself, it doesn't cover all what we call ICT's developments. So generally speaking, when we're talking about, let's say, information communication technology, we are not always referring to the infrastructure of the internet. So the concept definition of internet itself doesn't cover all these ICT developments. If you just look at the definition of the internet, it's just multiple, let's say, networks all connected, interacting with each other. So that's the technical internet that we're talking about. If you look at governance, maybe in the English-speaking world, that's clear. But if you look especially, let's say in Latin or in countries whose languages are based on Latin, for example, let's say Spanish, French, Portuguese, Italian, whenever they see that word governance, for them, it means governments. So that is why initially when we started to discuss internet governance, especially from these countries, we only had people from governments attending because they thought this would be something for governments. But that was what we call the limited focus. Nowadays, when we talk about internet governance, the governance is more like how it's being managed. So it's not only about governments, policymakers, and those kinds of decision makers, but we are focusing on all stakeholders. So there has been some discussion going back and forward with regard to the definition of internet governance, and a working group of the United Nations came with this definition. So internet governance is the development and application by governments, the private sector, and civil society in their respective roles of shared principles, norms, rules, decision-making procedures, and programs that shape the evolution and use of the internet. If we look at this definition, we see three key stakeholders. We see governments, we see the private sector, and we see the civil society. Initially, this definition was, let's say, drafted back in 2005. So back then, we can almost say that it forgot a very important, let's say, group of stakeholders. And this is the technical community. All those who were, let's say, developing the internet itself, they were left out, you know? So they were focusing more on governments, the private sector, where you have the money, the civil society, but those from the technical community were left out. Nowadays, it's different. So we have governments, private sector, technical community, and civil society, all of them focusing on the development of internet governance. When we talk about internet governance as well, generally speaking, we are looking at, initially, we have been looking at 5 areas, but with the recent developments, 2 more areas, they call them also baskets, were added to that group. So the first one would be infrastructure and standardization. The second one, legal, economic, development, social, cultural, and lately, the last few years, also human rights and security issues were added to that group. So I'll focus a bit on those right now. The infrastructure and standardization basket. If you look, as I did mention before, you need to have a telecommunication infrastructure in order to have, let's say, internet. You cannot have internet access without having a telecommunication infrastructure. Be it wired, wireless, satellite communication, Wi-Fi, it doesn't matter. We need to have a telecommunication infrastructure in place. But in addition to having a telecommunication infrastructure in place, we also need what we call standardization. Because just imagine if all of us try to come with a different standard, the internet would not function neither. We have, for example, IPv4. Albert did mention it, IPv4, IPv6. Just imagine if someone, let's say, comes with another standard that doesn't fit within the group of what we are doing. So that is why standardization is very important. And when we talk about standardization, when we talk about the infrastructure and standardization basket, we are looking at the telecommunication infrastructure itself, We are looking at the domain name system, which is based on the TCP protocol that Albert just mentioned. We are looking at the ISPs, Internet Service Providers. We are looking at web standards. We are looking at what we call convergence. When we talk about convergence, we are talking about, let's say, integration of internet, telecommunications, and multimedia. Nowadays, we don't hear that concept of convergence as we have been discussing this a few years ago, because nowadays with the internet, everything is already converged. So you don't need to build separate networks, but you can just have the internet, and with the internet, you can get a converged infrastructure. Within this group, we also focus on cybersecurity. We also focus on encryption. So what I'm trying to do, I'll be highlighting all these baskets. As you can imagine, we can spend a whole day talking just about one of these baskets. But I would like to give you an appreciation with regard to what normally we discuss when we are talking about internet governance. So the second, what we call a basket that we are talking about is what we call legal aspects. As you may know, there are a lot of, let's say, challenges that we are facing with the internet. For example, the internet doesn't know or recognize, let's say, borders. For the internet, St. Vincent and St. Lucia and Barbados, all of them are, even if we go further, it doesn't matter. It's one jurisdiction. But for us, living in legal systems, we do have jurisdictions. So that is why it's very important for us to define, especially when you're trying to deal with cybercrime, cyber issues, we need to focus on jurisdiction, because maybe a given law that is applicable in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, if you just go maybe just a few miles further in St. Lucia, for example, that same law may not be applicable. So that is why we need to focus also on jurisdiction when we are talking about the legal aspects of internet governance. Intellectual property. A lot is being done on the internet. People are creating things every day on the internet. So we need to know how to deal with all these intellectual properties that people are designing over the internet. Copyrights. This brings us also to copyrights. Maybe if a good friend there, Roxanne, builds something, what are her legal mechanism or rights that she does have, given that she's the author of that particular development? And this brings us also to brands, to patents, cybercrimes, and labor law. We are using the internet nowadays. We are working on how do you call it, from distance, distance work. So how do you deal with all these legal aspects when it comes to internet governance? So I'm going to highlight another one now. We have what we call the economic basket. Personally, I really like this one, especially given that we need to find more ways how we can use the internet to generate, let's say, income for our countries and also maybe for ourselves. Because most of the times we are just users of the internet. We're just using it. We are Google, we are doing all kind of Facebook and other things, but we're not really thinking how can we use the internet to, let's say, enhance the economy in our own country or jurisdiction. So when we talk about the economic basket, we are focusing, of course, on electronic commerce, e-commerce. We are focusing on consumer protection. We are talking about, for example, electronic signatures that are applicable within the economic world. We are talking about e-banking. We are talking also about virtual currencies that we are seeing nowadays. So all these are part just a little part of discussions going on when we talk about the economic aspects of internet governance. When we talk about development, we are looking, for example, at the digital divide. So let's say the have and the haves not within the internet arena. We are talking about, for example, universal access. So how can we promote universal access funds to get, let's say, especially underserved areas to give them also access to the internet? We are focusing on strategies to bridge the digital divide, and mostly, let's say, governments and policymakers, they are focusing on these areas. We may also focus on some social cultural issues, and not to forget policy and regulations that are very important for us to help develop, let's say, especially the economy in our country or jurisdiction. When we talk about, for example, socio-cultural aspects, we are looking at human rights, for example. The same rights that we have, let's say, in the real world, we do have rights also on the internet. So we need to be aware of what all these are in order for us to, let's say, promote a safe internet. We are looking, for example, also at content development. What kind of content are we developing within the social cultural arena? We are looking at privacy and data protection. The whole GDPR that Albert mentioned a while ago is based on privacy and data protection. So if you look at the Europeans, they are focusing a much more, or not much more, let me put it like this. They're focusing a lot on privacy and data protection. So that is why they came with this whole, let's say, legislation that should be dealing with privacy and data protection of their citizens and all those who are within the European Union. And this law comes into effect by 25th of May 2018. So there is a lot of discussion going on right now, especially for companies in order for them to be compliant with this law. When we talk about social cultural aspects, we're also looking at multilingualism and cultural diversity. So you have all kinds of, let's say, languages that are, most of the times people are using English or, let's say, the United Nations languages, but you have also other languages. For example, I'm not a native English speaker, so I have my own native language called Papiamento in Curaçao. So all these with, let's say, the multilingualism and cultural diversity, there is opportunity for all of us on the internet as well. When we talk about social cultural, we're also looking at rights of people with disability. And I think, I'm not sure if Bernadette, Secretary General of CTU, did mention this. And this is very, very important because while we are promoting access to the internet, we should not forget those who have a disability and they cannot take full advantage of the internet. So that is why we need to focus and see how we can also develop systems that they too can get access and use the internet. And not to forget, when we talk about social cultural aspects, not to forget, let's say, online safety programs, especially for our youngsters, for children. As you may know, the internet can also be used as a tool for, let's say, adults and others who may have other let's say, bad-minded or whatever you may call them, to get access to our children and to destroy them. So that is why we need to focus on that as well. So human rights, initially, as I did mention, we were not discussing within internet governance human rights. We were only discussing the five previous topics that I did highlight. But nowadays, people have started to realize there is an online and there is an offline world. So in reality, the same rights that people have, let's say, offline, these are the same rights that they have online as well. And we need to find ways how to focus on compliance. That's the difficult part of it. It's very easy to say that you have the same rights online that you have offline, but how do you to comply with these? And this is the challenge that we are facing. So sometimes people are also talk about maybe new human rights, but these are not new human rights. I put new, let's say, between quotes, for example. But these are the same rights that people have, but the application, that's the way how they are being used, that's different. For example, when we talk about human rights, we have freedom of expression. But freedom of expression also has its limit. This doesn't mean that because you have freedom of expression, you can say whatever you want. And nowadays with all these fake news that we're seeing nowadays, this is also a challenge. Where is the border of, let's say, freedom of expression and where you are in infringement with someone's, let's say, basic rights? We have, let's say, also right to impart or right to seek information. So these are our basic human rights. Whenever you have, for example, what we call an internet shutdown, for example, if a government decides, let's say, to shut down internet in its jurisdiction, then we can be talking about infringement of human rights, because people would not have then the right to seek or to impart information. So that is why you would also hear internet society's voice when we are seeing this kind of developments taking place globally. And talk about human rights, we also are focusing, for example, on privacy and data protection, as I already did mention. And another very important topic is gender issues. People, doesn't matter what their, let's say, let me call it sexual orientation is, based on human rights, we need to respect them for what they are. And with the internet also, when we talk about human rights, this is also one of the topics that they are addressing. So now I'm going to the last one. This is also the previous one, so human rights and security. These are the last two groups that were added to, let's say, internet governance discussions. And when we talk about security, for example, we are looking at cybersecurity. We are looking at cybercrime. We are talking about critical internet infrastructure. We are talking about, for example, cyber terrorism. We are looking at encryption. We are looking at spam. We are looking at digital signature. And also we are looking at protection of children online. So with this, for example, when we talk about internet governance, these are the 7 areas that we are discussing when we are talking about internet governance. And it's up to every or each particular country to decide what is important for their jurisdiction, and maybe they can put the focus on what is very important to them. For example, if cybersecurity is very important for St. Vincent, I think this is important for all of us all over the globe. You can focus a bit more on that. If the economic aspect is much more important, then you can focus on that. So you can choose, you have 7 groups of, let's say, what we call them baskets, that you can choose out of on which you would like to focus a bit more. And when we talk about internet governance, we have the also what we call stakeholders, people or group of people who have a stake in the internet. First of all, we have the governments, because governments are the ones elected in their particular jurisdiction, and they would like to promote, let's say, internet development in their country. So government is very important. We have also the private sector. So here you have where people, all the businesses, where the money is being generated. So this group is also very important. We have the what we call the ISP, internet service providers. We have the software companies. We have the content providers. And a very important stakeholder is also what we call the civil society. So if we would like to get much more voices to promote the multi-stakeholder model that Albert did mention a while ago, then especially people from the civil society, they are the ones that can do this job in a magnificent way. And then we have international organizations such as OECD, a lot of others. And also we have the internet community. With the internet community, most of them are like ICANN, the IATF, Internet Society, all the regional internet registries. So these are forming what we call the internet community. So I'll be focusing now a bit on the challenges that we are facing and how we can address these. When we're talking about internet governance, it's also very important for us to understand the two different worlds that we're living in. For example, traditional telecommunications is based, I'm not going to focus much on this, but I'm just mentioning it in order for you to understand that, is based on what we call the circuit switch technology. And the internet is based on another technology called the packet switch technology. Each one of them, let's say, have their own advantages and disadvantages, but we are talking about two different worlds. And especially policymakers and regulators nowadays, most of them, let's say, come from the old traditional telecommunications, circuit switch technology environment. So what are we seeing? It's very difficult for them if they don't have new tools and they would like to regulate this new world, then we have a challenge, because you have some old tools and you're trying to regulate a new environment with tools that are no longer applicable. So that is why we need to understand these two worlds. So that is why we are having discussions about technology disruption. You know, all these OTTs, these are technology disruption. And talking, for example, to regulators, they may say, okay, you see this internet thing is just disrupting traditional services. But if you look at history, and the future will also be the same, technology disruption has always been there. And this will continue to be like that. If you look at the telephony, for example, telephony services, they also did disrupt the telegraph. So just imagine if we still had telegraph, you know, so there's nothing wrong with that. If you look within the music industry, we had cassette recorders, and then we had even some other technology previous to that, and then CDs and iPod, and so on and so on. So technology disruption has always been there. But there is a big problem or challenge, depends how you look at it. I prefer to use the word challenge and not problem. There is a big challenge with the internet. So while change is the only constant, because change is the only constant, but when it comes to the internet strikes like lighting through all sectors. So if you look, for example, within the music industry, then, for example, it was only cassette recorders, iPod. That was something, let's say, within the music industry. If you look, for example, within the what I did mention, for example, telephony services. This was something within the voice services sector, traditional voice sector. But with internet, it doesn't matter. It strikes like lightning through all sectors. And this is the challenge that we are facing. For example, if you look at the telephony industry, you have voice over IP. So you have all these, let's say, alternatives to traditional, let's say, telephony. I'm not going to mention them. Skype is one that all of us are acquainted with. If you look at alternative to SMS, for example, we have WhatsApp nowadays. Most of us are using WhatsApp. Back then, BlackBerry also had its messenger system. But nowadays, I'm not sure how many people are still using BlackBerries, but in any case, WhatsApp is one that most of us are using nowadays. So we have alternatives to traditional telephony services. If you look, for example, at broadcasting, nowadays you have what we call video streaming. Most of us are just using Netflix, Apple TV, YouTube, etc., etc. So you see, also here the internet is strikes like lightning through other sectors. If you look at the transport industry, for example, taxi industry, you have Uber, you have Lyft, you have some others as well. And the funny thing is that whenever you have first we had, for example, Uber, it depends what version of English you're using. And then suddenly we start to see some other alternatives as well, like Lyft, for example. So also in the taxi industry, we are seeing how the internet is revolutionizing everything. If you look at the retail markets, so where people, those of you would like to go, Albert, I know, like to go to Miami to buy his stuff. Most of these shopping malls are, just empty nowadays because people are just buying stuff online. So also here we see how the impact of the internet on retail markets. If you look at hospitality industry, back then we used to just go to a travel agency and try to book a ticket. Nowadays we're just doing this online. So also here we see, let's say, the impact of the internet. And not to forget, let's say, the banking industry. Nowadays, you don't even go to banks. I mean, we're just doing online banking. In my case, it would not matter much because I don't have anything at the bank. But I mean, for those of you who have a lot of money, I mean, you're just doing online banking. And I just call it your X industry. So whatever you may think of, the internet can have, let's say, impact on that particular industry. So what does this mean? What should we do? Should we think we should find a way to ban the internet or whatever because it's causing problem to what we are doing or has been doing traditionally? Basically, there is no way back. So change, as I did mention, change is the only constant. So what we need to do is to embrace change. If you look, for example, at a caterpillar, I think that's the name of that. Before it becomes how you call it? Before it becomes butterfly, yes. Before it becomes a butterfly, there has been some developments. But just imagine if you try to break, that process. That caterpillar would never change into a butterfly. And this is the same thing with the internet. It does, let's say, cause some challenges for the traditional systems, but it also does give opportunities to a lot of people who didn't have, let's say, that opportunity before. So that is why we need to embrace changes. And this is an internet of opportunity. If you look at the internet itself, globally, more than 1.2, and this number could be higher right now. This is like almost 2 years ago. Let's say 2 million of US dollars are being generated over the internet just um, within 30 seconds. So just imagine another business, a kind of business that can produce this amount of money. There is none. So um, it give you also the opportunity to develop new businesses. And we are just seeing a shift in, let's say, jobs being created. I mean, old jobs, maybe we will not be focusing on old traditional jobs, but new jobs are being created. And one very important thing with the internet is what we call permissionless innovation. You don't need to ask permission from anyone if you would like to innovate. So if you have an idea, and one of the things that the creator gives all of us is a mind. All of us, we and it doesn't matter. And this is just science. It's not I'm saying it right now. It doesn't matter how big your head is or how small it is. Our brains, it seems like all our brains, they have the same size. So what does this mean? This is I know that we are very, how do you call it, believers in St. Vincent and Grenadines. So that is why I would like to focus a bit on this. So this means that all of us have the same opportunity. It doesn't matter if you're in Africa, or if you're in the Caribbean, or in the US, or whatever. You can't, our brains, they have the same size. So all of us can think as well. And with the nice thing with the internet, permissionless innovation, just to have an idea and then focus on it, how to make it reality. We are also seeing, let's say, development of the logistic industry. For example, I did mention with the retail industry, people no longer go to all these shopping malls, but you need to find a way how to transport all these goods back to your country, because still we need to find a way how to transport all these goods. So this is also an opportunity for the logistics, let's say, industry. It's also an opportunity for development of the ICTs industry, generally speaking. It's also an opportunity for equipment manufacturers because they need to sell more routers, more switches, more hubs, etc., etc. It's also an opportunity for ISPs and operators, telecoms infrastructure. Most of them are complaining they're not making money, but next time you meet them, just tell them you cannot have internet without a telecommunication infrastructure. So they should be focusing on development of the telecommunication infrastructure. And by doing that, if they're smart enough, they will be making money as well, because you cannot have internet without telecommunications infrastructure. And this is also an opportunity for what we call for application development, especially for governments. Most of our governments are talking nowadays about e-government, and this is an opportunity for them as well to use the internet. But all of this is only possible if we have one particular thing, and this is called broadband. Because if we don't have broadband, and all what I've said before, this is not possible. So we need to have broadband. And when I'm talking about broadband, I'm not talking about high-speed internet, 512K, and this kind of thing. These are not broadband. They may be based on the definition, let's say, high-speed internet. But when we talk about broadband, we are looking at, let's say, the ITU definition, 2 meg, and much more than that. So with that, I think I did highlight a bit on internet governance, and I do hope that I have given you, let's say, appreciation of what are the topics that normally we are discussing within internet governance. And I thank you. And again, it's a pity. I have hoped to be there. Like 2 weeks ago, I was in St. Vincent, and I have hoped to be there again this week or today, but it was not possible based on some other issues that I have to deal with. So, but any question, I'm here, and I'll be happy to answer that as well. So with that, thank you very much.
Any questions for Mr. Osepa before we go into our next break? Well, Mr. Osepa, it seems okay. We have one for Mr. Rudy. I'll pass the microphone so that he can hear
you. Shernon, you can hear me?
Yes, again, loud and clear.
Okay, good. Just go back to your first slide, please. The very, very first slide. I just wanted to.
My first, which one? You mean the title? This is my first.
Next one, maybe first, but
the agenda.
Keep going. Okay.
This one.
The white I went out with Daniel for the presentation. We had a question on a remote from the remote participation. And I think what the person said was that, I guess we were talking about ENSSEC, and the person said, I guess that would have been the IETF rather than ICAP. Right? That was kind of an interesting comment. But then one of your slides had something about
I think
ISOC and how it relates to the IETF.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Also, I just wanted to mention that, you said that the standards, the internet standards, are put together by the IETF.
Mm-hmm.
So it would be very useful to us to draw whatever conclusion there is, the relationship between the IETF and ISOC.
Yes. Okay.
Not always appreciate it.
Yes, of course.
And also, most of us in the room over the years have been associated with the ITU in terms of standards.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But then perhaps you could then bridge the gap there between how the IETF is doing standards on how does that relate to, or what is the relationship between the IETF and the forerunners, the ITU, who are still producing telecommunication standards.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Let me explain like this. For example, the Internet Engineering Task Force, Internet Society is the organizational home of the IETF, of the Internet Society is the organizational home of the Internet Engineering Task Force. So all the standards that were developed by the IETF, Internet Society has, let me call it legally, copyrights over all these standards, because Internet Society is the organizational home of the IETF. Within the IETF, Internet Engineering Task Force, they are focusing only on internet-related standards. For example, those of you who are connected on Wi-Fi in that particular room right now, you are using what we call an IEEE standard. So that's an IEEE 802.11, blah, 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 blah. So that's an IEEE standard. If you're using, for example, the GSM technology, GSM mobile technology, then you're using what we call ETSI standards. So you see, you have a lot of organizations that are focusing on one or a particular standard. If you look, for example, at one of your outlets, electrical outlets there in the room, they also comply with a given standard, NC or whatever, European, whatever. So if you look at ITU, International Telecommunication Union, Internet Telecommunication Union also has what we call a standard body. It's called ITUT. What it's doing within ITUT is to develop telecommunications standards. If you look, for example, at this slide, you guys can see it, right?
Yes.
Yes. If you look at this slide, the first one, what you have, it's telecommunication infrastructure. So ITU, for example, ITUT, they are focusing on all these telecommunications standards. So that's the role of the International Telecommunication Union. If we go just using this same slide, you see there internet protocol, IP, packet switching, technology, and so on and so on. So the IATF, Internet Engineering Task Force, they are focusing on that particular part. Let's say on what we call all the standards that make it possible for the domain name system and the IP addressing system to function. So that would be, let's say, the primary focus of the Internet Engineering Task Force. And of course, if you go to the highest level as well, where you have all these application web standards, they are focusing on those as well. But ITU, for example, International Telecommunication Union, they are focusing only on the first part of this slide. They are focusing on the physical telecommunication infrastructure itself, and not on the other let's say, areas. And that's the same with the IATF as well. They don't focus on, let's say, the physical telecommunication infrastructure. They assume that it works properly, and once it works, they will just develop standards in order for the internet infrastructure to function. So I think with that, I did answer your question, Rudy.
Yes. Yes, he confirms that he got it clear. Do you have any other questions? That sounds like a loud no. Mr. Osepa, we want to thank you very much for that presentation on the importance of internet governance and how to address.
Yes, and let me just mention something. I just would like to say it online, on air, or whatever, you know. Rudy is a very good friend there in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And maybe you guys don't know, but I think not last time, but I think one of my previous trips where I was in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and he took me to Backway as well. So I had a good time with Rudy there. So Rudy, thank you very much. And also thanks to all of you there in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Okay, thank you very much.
Let's put them out together, Mr. Osepa and Rudy, for taking it to Backway. All right, folks. So we're at the point where we're going to do some more networking. And this time, hopefully, we'll be chewing a little longer while we talk. So we're going to take our break now. We want to try to redeem some time. So we're going to try to start back promptly at 1. Lunch will be served on the first floor. There is a dining area there. You could either use the stairs, or if you choose the elevator, just press 1 and it will stop, you exit. So have a good networking session while you eat. See you at 1.